Today we will be discussing transport phenomena in cementitious materials with regards to the outcome of the ERICA project. Thank you for joining us for this video. A large extent of structures around the globe are made from cementitious materials. If we take a closer look with an SEM image, we can see that cement-based systems are a complex multi-phase system. If we take an even closer look going down to the nanoscale, it has been proven that CSH is also a porous network. It constitutes the main percolating phase in cement paste that is the biggest interconnected network, meaning that all macroscopic properties are tightly linked to the properties of CSH. It is these properties that actually give space and allow fluids to infiltrate and transport through a structure, causing things like cracking, rising damp, and chloride ingress. These are all detrimental elements to a structure's durability. So, what actually are the driving forces that control the fluid's transport? There are four main mechanisms, and we will be discussing the first two with regards to the outcome of the ERICA project. Permeability is a macroscopic parameter that gives information about the breathability of a porous material. The flow rate of liquid Q through a liquid saturated porous material is described mathematically by using Darcy's law. For a cross-sectional area A, P is the hydrostatic pressure across the system, L is the length of the specimen, and K is the intrinsic permeability. The intrinsic permeability is expected to be independent of fluid. However, this is not the case for cementitious materials and reflects anomalous behavior. In cementitious materials, anomalous water transport is often observed. Usually in other porous materials, the observed rate of imbibition decreases linearly with the square root of time, as shown by the black line. This is so-called Fickian transport. In the Fickian desorption curve, a linear decrease of mass with the square root of time is observed, and then mass change becomes constant with time. Any deviation from this behavior is called anomalous transport, as shown by the gray dotted line. In this case, we see drying hardened cement paste from 90 to 80% relative humidity shows linear behavior of up to 3 hours. However, this leaves us with the question, what is the mechanism behind anomalous water transport? Several theories of anomalous transport exist. The first theory assumes that as cementitious materials are subjected to wetting, initially fast capillary transport into larger pores takes place. This stops as the water reaches the end of the sample and results in swelling of the material. The second theory assumes that anomalous transport is caused by microcracks due to severe drying processes. In the initial stage, water penetrates into microcracks, causing an irregular penetration front, as shown as the fluorescent photo. The third theory is based on time-dependent permeability. The contact time is describing the duration of contact between a cementitious material and a fluid source. Alteration of the permeability depends on contact with imbibed water, and therefore at any location is triggered only by the arrival of the advancing wet front. There is no one clear explanation of how water transports through cementitious materials, and in the ERICA project we use NMR techniques to conduct experiments and provide a simple diffusion and capillary-based model. Over here, we see an MRI magnet used in the ERICA project. MRI is amongst the few non-invasive techniques that allow water ingress observations with resolution to a few nanometers. In a simple experiment, we place a cylindrical sample 60 mm long into a water bath, making sure the sample is pre-dried to empty all gel porosity. The pore distribution across the sample is observed in the image below, where one-dimensional experiments were conducted after 1 hour of water uptake, 3 hours, 1 day, up until 1 month to observe the pore size distribution at the chosen depths. This gives us the plot that we obtain on the right-hand side for filled porosity fractions at sample depths of 3 mm against the square root of experiment time. We observe that a large amount of pores in red decrease after a few days of wetting, while smaller pores in green increase. This is called pore relaxation and is observed in samples where gel porosity is removed while drying. After 1 month of water ingress and pore relaxation, we observe only gel porosity. This indicates that initially larger pores are filled and then diffusion to smaller pores occurs. For more information on these big magnets, visit our NMR and MRI videos. Knowing all of this, one might wonder, how long does pore relaxation last, and can it actually be measured? In the next slide, we will discuss the development of a simple model to answer just that. Cementitious materials are known to have a dynamic microstructure. Work in literature shows measurements on bulk cement paste using proton NMR to show the presence of a dynamic microstructure. If we look at starting off with an as-prepared sample, which is initially in saturation equilibrium, we will observe poor relaxation behavior with time. After drying the sample, water is removed from the pores, collapsing smaller pores and leading to formation of larger pores. Upon re-wetting, water quickly saturates the larger pores formed during drying and some smaller pores. This happens on a timescale of approximately 12 hours. By continuing to supplement water to the porous system, the water from the larger pores relaxes into smaller pores. Thereafter, the porosity starts to become more refined, suggesting that the porous system is relaxing towards a saturation-dependent equilibrium. The method that created these results has been extended in the ERICA project, and the schematic of the Garfield NMR equipment used is shown. A sample is cured under water for 28 days, after which the sample is cut into thin slices, pre-dried, and then measured using Garfield NMR. For further information on the method, please visit our NMR and MRI videos. Results from the Garfield NMR experiment are shown in this plot, where we are going to observe information about water-filled porosity measured at 600 microns below the wetting surface. At time 0, the dry sample is plotted. The first data point shows the start of the re-wetting process. Water quickly saturates in the first hour and the capillary pores. After the large pores reach full saturation, the water-filled porosity is starting to relax into finer pores. The changes are tracked for 2 days, and now we are ready to present a basic version of the new transport model. The model starts off by looking at the classic transport equations described by molecular diffusion and capillary action. Mathematically, they look rather similar. However, they describe different physical phenomena. The classical time and saturation dependent diffusion equation is reformulated such that we make the equation dependent on the transport coefficient as well. It is known from literature that the diffusion scales with pore radius from Washburn equation, and the time-dependent water saturation porosity is a function of saturation and time, which is information that we get from NMR data. For simplicity, the effective diffusivity is considered as a tri-layered composite distinctly for interlayer, gel, and capillary pores, with transport occurring in series as shown in this equation. To further evidence our proposed mechanism, we consider the following. Total saturated porosity is constant, the material is fully hydrated, and the gel and interlayer water is exponentially relaxing towards a saturation equilibrium. These are all expressed in the equations on the right-hand side, which are consistent throughout the model. The figure on the left-hand side describes pore size distribution at different saturations during a drying experiment, starting off with a fully saturated and equilibrated microstructure with water residing in gel and interlayer spaces. As we dry the structure, water from gel pores is gradually removed. At a specific saturation, gel pores collapse, forming larger pores, and finally, for a completely dried sample, the interlayer water is also removed. We obtain the plot on the right-hand side where we wish to show the equilibrium pore fraction as a function of water saturation during a drying experiment. The model considers SB and SC as parameters adopted from NMR data, and changes in the equilibrium porosity are considered to happen linearly. During wetting, starting off once again with the same consistent equations, from a fully saturated sample, water quickly floods larger pores and some smaller pores. Then this is followed by further resaturation of smaller gel pores and interlayer spaces. Due to different mechanisms on drying and wetting, the characteristic time constants are not equal. The structure then resaturates the larger spaces first, followed by the smaller spaces. In the plot on the right-hand side, we show the evolution of the equilibrium porosity on rewetting, a simple pre-dried to a saturation of SA. The model is in good agreement with NMR data. The best fit parameters that are relevant to cement science are shown in this table, and the effective diffusivity calculated for the saturated sample is in good agreement with other authors' findings as well. It is important to understand transport of fluids through cement-based materials at a microstructural level. Lattice Boltzmann is a very flexible computational fluid dynamics solver that closes the gap between macro and microscale analysis. It caters for complex geometries, as is usually the case in porous media, and handles multiphase fluids. We can start to understand this by looking at a macro-sized body of fluid with liquid flowing from the left to the right-hand side, consisting of fluid packets, which are the individual red dots, having a velocity vector e at position r and time t. If we take a look at the enclosed black region, this is a lattice network of equidistant nodes, as the name suggests, and we have a central red node which consists of a packet of fluid at a particular node. This has the possibility to interact with its neighbors by means of streaming, and also there are central lattice node which can interact with fluid arriving from its neighbors by means of collision, which are the blue arrows. This process keeps on occurring until the system reaches an equilibrium and forms the basis of understanding of lattice Boltzmann. However, one might wonder, why is this technique really useful? Fluid flow across a porous medium in lattice Boltzmann is driven by either a fluid velocity, density, or pressure gradient. A constant body force can be applied across a structure to calculate the permeability using Darcy's law, as seen in the sequence of velocity maps for a liquid flowing across a quasi-continuous microstructure on the left-hand side. We are also able to simulate solid interaction in a multiphase environment using lattice Boltzmann methods and the new sorption transport model explained in a few earlier slides. From this, we can get plots of intrinsic permeability and capillary diffusivity against modeling time. We can observe that the behavior of a resorption cycle is similar, with a decrease during desorption and a steady increase during adsorption. This is also in line with experimental NMR data and shows the relevance of the lattice Boltzmann method for such cases. The methods for studying transport phenomena of small ions, such as chloride through cement paste, involve using either a thin or a bulk sample. For a smaller sample, either one side or all sides are exposed to certain gas flow or solution with the soft ions. For a larger sample, equilibration time and penetration depths can then be linked to transport parameters such as diffusion coefficients. As a consequence, the exposure to a harsh environment leads to changes in the microstructure, such as changes in porosity, formation of new phases, or leakage of some other elements. There are multiple experimental setups to determine the diffusivity of cementitious materials. One of the categories includes electromigration experiments, where ion diffusion is accelerated by an electric field. This setup was used in one of the ERICA projects to study the transport of chloride to a matrix of CSH produced by hydrating a reactive B-light binder at water-to-binder ratio of 0.35. A disc sample with 10 mm thickness is placed in between two reservoirs, one containing a chloride solution called upstream and one without chloride called downstream. By applying an external electrical voltage, chloride ions migrate through the sample from the upstream to the downstream compartment. By measuring the increase of chloride content in the downstream compartment, we can plot the amount increase over time. The slope of the curve together with other parameters is used to determine the chloride diffusion coefficient. For the hydrated B-light matrix, the values tend to be slightly higher than a hydrated OPC at the same water-to-binder ratio. But when the B-light is hydrated together with 10% microsilica, the diffusion coefficient is significantly reduced, showing that the CSH matrix is more resistant towards chloride penetration. We must keep in mind that the diffusion coefficient that results from the experiment depends on many parameters that can affect its results. To understand the transport mechanisms, complex models are necessary to explain all the processes that happen simultaneously during testing. Ionic transport in cement paste occurs through pores of 10 nanometer size or below within the CSH pore network. However, at such a small scale, atomistic effects arise and greatly affect motion of ions. This schematic is a simple description of the pore system. It contains various ionic species of different sizes and valences which interact between themselves, but also with their surroundings, basically the CSH walls. Put simply, the nanopore is dominated by two main phenomena. Surface effects are present due to the high pH environment in cement paste, selenol groups of CSH are ionized, charging negatively the surface in contact with the pore solution. The surface therefore attracts or repels ions depending on their size and valence, but also depending on its interaction with water molecules at the very surface. There is also the presence of entropic effects. These are due to the non-ideality of the pore solution, that is the presence of different ionic species which are interacting with different interatomic potentials. In the context of modeling these atomistic phenomena, Helmholtz was the first in 1853 to discover the forming of a layered structure, which forms around a charged solid surface when it interacts with an electrolyte. As a matter of fact, the negative charge at the surface of CSH results in an accumulation of mobile ions in the solution near the surface. Relative to the charge on the surface, ions of opposite charge build up near the surface to neutralize the surface charge, and ions of like charge are depleted in the region due to the effects of entropy and Coulombian repulsion. It is the cumulative results of all of these phenomena combined which results in the so-called electrical double layer around the CSH. In order to quantify transport, we need to compute the diffusivity of each ionic species. Therefore, the Poisson-Nernst Planck equation needs to be resolved at the Bohr scale. To do so, molecular modeling techniques such as molecular dynamics and Monte Carlo algorithms are employed to compute the driving forces of transport, which are consisting of matter diffusion, electrostatics, as well as entropic effects. Once the individual and initial contributions are settled, numerical tools such as finite element methods or the previously presented lattice Boltzmann methods can be applied to compute the ionic effective diffusivities. So to conclude, today we have discussed transport phenomena in cementitious media. We have obtained some results from the ERICA project, like pore relaxation that can explain anomalous water transport. A new transport model has been created which correlates well with NMR results. Lattice Boltzmann is a model that can be used to describe transport coefficients. Mini migration experiments can efficiently determine chloride diffusion coefficients. Studying microsilica may also lead to increased matrix resistance to chloride penetration. And finally, nanoscopic models of ionic transport can help explain CSH electrical double layers. So finally, I would like to acknowledge and thank the EU Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Programme for making this work possible. Thank you for listening to this video. We hope you have learned more about the various facets of cementitious materials, and please make sure to check out our other videos created by the entire ERICA team. Thank you.
I'm going to tell you about everything.